30 Years a Watchtower Slave, Chapter 9, entitled From Zest to Disgust. The first subheading is entitled New Zest for Action. Now that the society had put out this God's organization versus Satan's organization in order to put water on the fire, I guess you could say, of those who could see the hypocrisy of the building up of God's organization when Christendom was doing the same thing. Well, now it was time to put God's organization, this new thought, this new teaching, this new doctrine, into practice in the ministry. It was now the ins versus the outs. And if you didn't want to die at Armageddon, which was always coming soon and is still always coming soon, you need to get in with the ins, the Jehovah's Witnesses, or else you're going to die at this supernatural worldwide slaughter, you could say. And this really caused the witnesses to have a proud spirit. He mentions, the author does, that they became like conquerors and warriors. It was their duty to lead people out of false religion and into the life-saving work of God's organization. And it had come time for them to tone down the name of Jesus and to put the name of Jehovah in its place. Well, they did that in 1931 when they took on the name Jehovah's Witnesses. And this really separated them. That was kind of the last straw, or one of the last straws, that really separated them from being a Christian religion. They had become Jehovah's organization in name and in practice, and they were led to ignore Jesus Christ. The next subheading is entitled We Press the Battle. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses in those days were relentless and ruthless. Maybe you remember pictures of them picketing with signs such as "Religion is a snare and a racket," and they wore things like sandwich boards with some slogan or something like that. Well, the witnesses would do that in public. They would do that in front of a church while churchgoers were going home. They would do that in the door-to-door ministry, and so on and so forth. And of course, it was inevitable that they were going to rub people the wrong way. And so that happened. The stormtroopers of the National Socialist Party began to single them out, proclaiming that they were American propagandists organized from the United States. So this led to arrests. This led to mob action, and so on and so forth. So this actually happened in Germany well before any of these arrests and mob actions started in the United States. Now the next subheading is entitled We Fish in Troubled Waters. So in Germany, things were going from bad to worse. Unemployment was rampant, and better times were now fading away. Communism was creeping in, and so were the Nazis. But somewhere in the middle, there were millions of people who wanted a spiritual and peaceful way of life, and those were the people that the Watchtower Society was after. No different today. They go after people who are emotionally unstable. You may remember in Kingdom Ministries and in service meeting parts where you were directed to continue working your territory to find those who are, quote unquote, more receptive to the good news. And what kind of circumstances will lead someone to be more receptive to the good news? Maybe a death in the family, someone losing their job, someone going through an emotional time in their life. That's what the witnesses still do today. They fish in troubled waters. The author goes on to mention that if events had not transpired to put the Hitler movement into control, Germany might have become the first Jehovah's Witness state of God's organization. I thought that was pretty interesting. The next subheading is entitled, We Go In for Mass Production. So the factory in Magdeburg had been completed, and so now it was time to get this thing going. Let's get it up and operational and spitting out millions of copies of Jehovah's Witness literature. So what did they do? They sent a representative from Brooklyn who was an expert on the Taylor system. I didn't get a chance to look too much into this, but maybe you could do that for yourself as well. Taylor, Taylor system, about mass production. And so what they would do, several people would use stopwatches and begin to clock and time the movements of the personnel. Can you imagine that if you're at work and your boss is standing right over your shoulder timing you on how fast or how quick you do certain tasks? That was going on back then. And so, of course, they reassigned people according to what they could do the best. And some people didn't like that. There was some backlash. But what does Watchtower do best to those who complain? They give you the boot. And so new workers who came in, who were glad and eager to carry on such a privilege of working at Bethel, were brought in. And so they were taught the value of cost figuring. Huge margins of profits were to be made because distribution was basically zero. And when I say distribution, I say the publishers did not get paid. They used their own money, time, and resources to distribute the Watchtower and Awake magazines and the books and so on and so forth. So the Watchtower Society has always had free labor. Now, they weren't allowed to make their public or to make their financial statements public, and that's even today. I don't think there's one person in this world outside of a handful of who knows who's on top of that organization that knows the financial status of that religion. But he mentions an interesting fact that whenever there were large capital expenditures to be made, such as remodeling or expanding the factory, they didn't use accumulated funds. No, they couldn't do that. Instead, they borrowed from the brothers on the basis of issued bonds. This same principle was used in Brooklyn. This was used up until 2014. They never use accumulated funds. No, if you want a Kingdom Hall rebuilt or need some remodeling work done, well, you have to take out a loan from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And last year that was done away with. But I think the reason why they stopped doing that, and this is just my speculation, was that they were losing their tax exemption because they were making money off of their brothers and sisters. They were, in essence, acting like a bank. And so in order to keep their tax exemptions, they got rid of this loan arrangement. And anyways, that's my crazy thought for the day. He mentions that their factories had become so efficient and our leadership and organization was so successful that Brooklyn soon put us in charge of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Austria. And they were named printeries for the Scandinavian countries as well. It is my considered opinion, the author's opinion here, that the Watchtower religion would have emerged as the top religion of Europe if its forward march had not been stopped by World War II in 1939. Interesting thought. The next subheading is entitled, I Get Into Trouble. The author soon learned that if anyone wanted to get on, he had to keep his opinions to himself. That's no different today. If you voice your opinions or seem to be disgruntled or complain about anything, well, your ass is going to be sent back to the back room to have a sit down with a couple of elders. He mentions that while secular governments allow their citizens to claim conscientious objections to certain things, the Watchtower Society did not grant this privilege to its members at Bethel. Cadaver gore Sam, or corpse-like obedience, was still the policy. And he mentions an incident that it was his responsibility to get all the Bethelites to sign a paper to remain at Bethel. Some objected out of their conscience, and he kept this quiet for over a year. Well, a spy found out, reported him to the director, and when the director found out, he approached him, and before he could say anything, the director says, I know everything you do, whether in the office or out in the field or in the Kingdom Hall. Well, that sounds no different than today. The next subheading is Unrest in Bethel. There's always unrest in Bethel because they're slave drivers. With the organization expanding, with methods being improved, productions being stepped up, and sales going beyond what they can handle, little consideration was given to personal likes and dislikes. Even their Bethelites' personal time was rigidly organized and strictly regimented. And if you've ever worked at Bethel for any amount of time, and I say any amount of time because I've worked there for a couple of stints as a temporary worker for a week at a time, you will see that everything is regimented. Your schedule is insane. I don't see how people can do that for years or even decades. I don't even know how they do it for over a month. I couldn't. There's no way I could. And so the next subheading is entitled, I Get Disgusted. So he mentions that early in 1927 he had become thoroughly disgusted with the way things were going in the organization. He said it was like torture and torment, suppressing his Christian thinking and service in favor for organizational mindedness. But he realized that if he quit Bethel and stayed in Germany, he would never find peace because, boy, the organization was going to hunt him down until they had gotten rid of his influence totally. I can probably attest to that. There are tons of stories out there of people who fade away, are years away from the organization, and yet the elders find them doing something that they disapprove of, and it goes to hell in the handbasket pretty quickly. So the author sent in his birth certificate and other necessary papers and applied for a passport. In June of 1927, after 13 years in Germany, he once again set foot on the good soil of the United States of America. This is going to conclude this chapter, and please stay tuned for the next. Thank you for taking time to watch and listen to this presentation. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for the next chapter.